All right, welcome to Legal Tech Week for April 26, 2021, where the top story today is that it's Joe Patrice's birthday. Happy birthday,
Yay.
Joe.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. Yeah.
And because of that, you get to do first everything today. So,
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, so you can start by introducing yourself.
Yeah, I'm Joe Patrice from the senior editor of Above the Law and host of the Thinking Like a Lawyer podcast. And it is my birthday. I'm obviously, as you can tell, I'm 28. See, this is the problem with when we all mute ourselves when we're not talking. Nobody was able to hear that people laughed at that. It kind of killed it, kind of made it seem like, wow, this guy's just conceited. So that's my story.
And in another big development, you are coming to us live from the global headquarters of Above the Law, right?
I am. It's kind of like was sort of like the beginning of an Indiana Jones movie, opening the door, like mail piled up, all kinds of moving dust off of the monitors and everything. It's crazy, but it's good to check out what the office has been going through.
All right. And then going around, Victoria, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, my name is Victoria Hudgins. I'm based in Philadelphia, where I write about legal technology and how lawyers are using technology in their practice or for their clients. Primarily my byline is in Legal Tech News, but you'll also find me on law.com, The American Lawyer, Corporate Counsel, and other ALM publications.
Thank you very much. Victor.
Hi everyone, Victor Lee. I'm Assistant Managing Editor with the ABA Journal covering the business of law and technology. I am not at the ABA Journal office. I haven't been there in more than a year now. And the last time I went was basically just throw out some food that was in my desk. So that was probably a good use of my time.
Hopefully you got it all.
I hope so.
Niki, you made it.
I did. Sorry, I was late. I had a meeting that went right up to 3. My name is Niki Black. I'm the legal technology evangelist with My Case, and I am a legal tech journalist. I write columns for ABA Journal, Above the Law, Daily Record, and the My Case blog. And happy birthday, Joe.
Thanks.
And you write for so many places that you can't even remember them all. Zach, how about you?
Hey there, everybody. My name is Zach Warren. I'm the editor-in-chief of ALM's Legal Tech News. I'm based here in Minnesota, and if I tried to go into ALM's nearest office, I think I'd be going to like either Denver or Cincinnati. So I'm not gonna try and do that anytime soon. I think you'll catch me in my home for at least the immediate future.
And last but not least for today, Steve Embry.
Hi, Steve Embry. I'm coming to you from the Tech Law Crossroads offices, which I've been in and never left, at least for several years. I write the blog Tech Law Crossroads, which deals with legal technology, legal innovation, and whatever the hell else I want to talk about, since it's mine. Prior to that, I practiced law for close to 40 years as a litigator in big law.
And I am coming to you from the global headquarters of Law Site's blog and Law Next podcast, which is here in quaint little Gloucester, Massachusetts, a few hundred yards from the waterfront near the ocean. Pretty place this time of year. Hopefully we all know what we're going to talk about today, because I've completely lost track, and our typical little spreadsheet system had a little breakdown this week. So,
Bob, as I told you before we started, I haven't known what I'm talking about in 40 years. So.
Right, and really, that's never stopped any of us. So I'm not too worried about it. But as I said, it's Joe's birthday, so he gets the honors of kicking us off today. Except he's muted. We'll definitely won't laugh at your jokes if you're muted.
That's true. So I actually don't know what I had a few options. I didn't know what people necessarily wanted to hear out of me. One thing that
dating.
I think that probably was going to be what we talked about. So it has come to my attention that the folks from Roll On Friday, a great UK-based law blog, kind of an similar to Above the Law, but over there, that the founders of that have started a little tech startup called Lawyer, without an E in there. And it's a dating app for lawyers to date lawyers, which sounds like my existential nightmare, but apparently they think that this is something that they can do. I just thought it was interesting that people who are more in my profession, straight journalists, have dabbled in the tech world, not so much as making law work better, like a lot of the vendors we talk about here, but making people's lives that much worse by putting two lawyers together and creating whatever that creates.
Yeah, and what do people think of that?
Whenever I hear something like that, I always think of that scene in Ghostbusters when it was like, I'm the key master. It's like, well, I'm the key holder. It's like, hey, should we get them together? It's like, no, we probably shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
I'm so excited for the first conflicts check that comes up and you have to run it through and it's like, oh, so how do you know this person? Oh, well, we met on Lawyer and that'll make me happy.
I was trying to remember. I was trying to dig around real quick. I couldn't find it. I could swear I've written in the past about something like that years ago. It wasn't an app. It was a website. So it wasn't like is this like a swipe left, swipe right kind of an app or something like,
that's what it
antitrust
seems
lawyer
like
no. But there was a website like Lawyers in Love or something years ago that was like a dating service for lawyers. And I don't know whether that even still exists or whatever. It just doesn't seem like a great business proposition to me. But
it's
yeah,
such a good idea.
I'm always, I was reminded when you were talking of that, that great movie. I think it was Adam's Rib, I think was the name of it, with Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn, where they were both lawyers and they had a case against one another, which of course is an impossibility. But nevertheless, they were such a great couple when they interacted. And it was a really cool movie for that reason. But I don't think that's very realistic on any number of fronts.
Yeah. You remind me, Joe, that you did have the story from last week that we never got to that we were going to talk about. Was that the other one you were talking about? Should we talk about that as well, or?
Yeah, I don't know how much it's still timely, but last week we had the Supreme Court issued one of their technical rulings, which is usually a sign to get scared because they don't deal too well with technical issues. But the issue, which was interesting and I think has a lot of value for startups, is the decision came down and said, yes, code is copyrightable, but if you're copying even a fairly substantial amount of it for the purpose of setting an API that people understand, that's fair use. And fair use is something that unfortunately isn't very well fleshed out. Courts try to get around it all the time, which is a bane to all of us who write parody stuff. But it was a cool take to just say, hey, they didn't even get to whether or not this was a violation. They said, even if it were, this would be fair use. It's totally cool if you're trying to set up something that allows people to understand and use each other's stuff, which I think has great ramifications for creativity, which is the whole point of intellectual property law in theory, even though we've kind of gotten away from that. So I was kind of excited about it. And I thought it played in well with Victoria's story last week, talking about APIs and such. It's out there, and I think it's going to have some impact on other vendors that we work with in our world going forward.
Yeah, when I saw that last week and I read, I think my colleague Jacqueline Thomason, she wrote that up. I think it was her on National Law Journal. And I was just kind of like, it is interesting. And I think it would spur more people creating those APIs. I don't know if legal tech, if it would encourage them, because I think with speaking to legal tech vendors, it's just the clients have to say, hey, I actually want this. Even though we're starting to the legal tech purchasers that I'm reaching out to, they're saying, yeah, we want better APIs. So I don't think necessarily the Supreme Court not weighing in with stopping legal tech companies is them being told from their clients, hey, I need more interoperability among my different types of vendors. So, the Supreme Court is kind of saying, hey, you guys have the freedom to do that. Now I just think it has to be the client, that client demand to say, hey, do this. So it helps them, but I think it's a bigger issue with legal tech companies.
This is big news. We have somebody in the chat who has actually joined the lawyer dating app. So there we go. We can get firsthand experience, a firsthand report. Maybe one of us on this panel should go undercover and check it out and then report back in a future episode.
Yeah, I think my wife would kill me if I did that.
Yeah, well, as it happens, I'm married to a lawyer, although in my defense, she wasn't a lawyer when I married her. So
Yeah, see there, that works. I'm going to go on and try to catfish a Supreme Court justice. So,
all right. What else? Again, I'm kind of lost in what we have this week. I might just mention the story that one of the stories that I wrote about, just because I think it was really notable news that Rocket Lawyer, which is a platform that provides legal forms and legal services to individuals and consumers, raised $223 million, which is a lot of money by any measure. And given it's been around since 2008, but given its prior raises were all a couple of $1 million here and there along the way, it's never really raised a substantial amount of money. And I think clearly this is a sign of we talk so much about alternative methods of delivering legal services, but I think this just underscores how many people are turning to this kind of a company, LegalZoom, Rocket Lawyer, that sort of thing, for legal help. I think a lot of people forget that Rocket Lawyer actually provides lawyers, not just forms. You can get help from a lawyer through Rocket Lawyer, but it's a huge boost, and clearly their business has soared even higher because of the pandemic over the past year, and because of people needing to obtain legal help in ways that don't require them to leave their homes. But it was already really taking off. I think he said, what do they have, 35 million or something, 25 million, 35 million registered users in the United States. And they have a huge audience in other parts of the world. They have a big presence in the UK. I talked to Charlie Moore, the CEO, last night, who was telling me that I think in France, something like a quarter of all consumers in France have an account with Rocket Lawyer through their workplaces. Their employers are providing them, and that's happening more and more in the United States as well. Rocket Lawyer was one of the first to kind of partner with, when the UK set up its, they didn't call it Alternative Legal Services Board, whatever they called it. Rocket Lawyer was one of the first to become an authorized provider under that. Now it's participating in the sandbox in Utah, providing legal help through that Utah sandbox. So I think it's a real sign of the times. And again, it's also notable that Charlie Moore is a Black legal tech founder in a field that remains notorious for having a very small number of people of color as founders in the legal tech industry. So congratulations to them for doing that.
Well, I thought it was super interesting because Charlie Moore is great. He's a great guy. He's so unassuming in some ways. And I think that that's partly why I feel like Rocket Lawyer just is under the radar sometimes. LegalZoom gets so much attention, and Rocket Lawyer is doing the hard work, a little bit under the radar, succeeding, doing a lot of really interesting, important things. And you just don't hear quite as much about him. So I was really happy to see that you covered it, and I saw it elsewhere as well, and some major legal tech publications as well, not just tech publications, not just legal tech. So I was super happy to hear it. But I just think it's interesting how sometimes there's a lot of hoopla about some companies, and others, for some reason, just there isn't as much hoopla about them, but they're behind the scenes really innovating and doing a lot of really interesting things. And I feel like Charlie's one of those, heads up one of those kinds of companies. He's really done a lot of great things over the years, and I was super happy to see that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, and
agree.
I always kind of wonder, like, do more people, like, outside of like legal tech and the legal field, do they know of LegalZoom because of those commercials, and that kind of brings brand awareness? But like what we've seen with kind of like COVID-19 and the money that they're raising, and that Rocket Lawyer is one of the first, or at least publicly, to say like they were going to take part in the Utah sandbox. They really are exploring like those different avenues that you can provide like legal services. And especially, like I've heard with some people, you don't maybe want to tackle the consumer side because it's kind of like consumers don't have a ton of like legal needs necessarily. They don't have legal budgets like corporations, but it's kind of like he's showing that there is a market for that. You can still and not necessarily target like a big law or corporate legal departments.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, I feel like unassuming wasn't the right word. He has a very commanding presence when you meet him. I don't mean that he's just not, there's a better word for it, but.
Well, one thing is he's not pretentious is one thing. I guess,
Right.
some CEOs you've met
like
are just
that,
have a lot of swagger and pretension around them. And he's just a nice guy. He's just a really nice guy.
Exactly.
You know, also a former, not only a lawyer, but a former naval officer during the Gulf War, very accomplished guy. And so.
I just wanted to cry. I think pretentious is not pretentious is a much better. Unassuming, I don't think was the best adjective. So I just wanted to come up with a better one that more clarified what I meant.
Yeah, spinning off Victoria's point too, just thinking about it from the funder's standpoint, I think it's a really smart bet on somebody like Rocket Lawyer for the COVID reasons, but also we've mentioned Utah a few times in regulatory sandboxes. We've talked about that here in the past, how that's probably only going to increase moving forward. And if you have somebody like Rocket Lawyer who's been through that in the UK, been through that at Utah, knows kind of the regulatory hoops that you need to jump through, that when it does open up to, say, a California, New York, which is being talked about right now, they're probably going to have the jump on a lot of other companies that may not know how to jump through those hoops in the way that Rocket Lawyer does. So if you're looking for a company to bet on from a funding standpoint, it makes sense that they have a very high market cap moving forward.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they're hardly even a bet at this point. I mean, they're a well-established company with a good, solid customer base. I mean, this is a real sort of I think they characterized it even as a growth equity investment. And, we're probably going to be, this is another one that we're probably going to be seeing, looking at an IPO not too much farther down the road, just because it seems to be a natural next step, especially after an investment like this. Any other thoughts on that?
I definitely agree that like they've been more low key than like LegalZoom or like one of those. And maybe that was by design. I mean, what's the company that everybody demonizes when they talk about this kind of stuff? It's LegalZoom, right? It's like, oh, you don't want to be like LegalZoom. We don't want to be like LegalZoom and blah blah. Well, maybe Rocket Lawyer avoided that by not being the tall poppy in that situation.
That's a really good point too.
Yeah, and actually, Charlie, I mean, there's something else that Charlie said to me when we talked yesterday is that. And he was also on my podcast not long ago. If anybody wants to go back and listen to this, we had a much longer conversation. But he said that their approach has not been to be sort of confront the legal system and try and take it on. It's been to try and partner with some of the established legal system. I mean, they famously had a partnership with the ABA a few years ago. That I don't know exactly what happened to that. Victor, you may know. I mean, it kind of fizzled out, but. They were partnering with the ABA.
We have a lot of partnerships. I mean,
yeah, right. I mean, they've partnered with these, with Utah. They're talking to Arizona about doing something there. I mean, they've been trying to work with the bars, not against them, and work with some of the established providers. So whether that's good or bad, I don't know.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Bob, you mentioned about like Rocket Lawyer might be that next legal tech company that goes public. And my story is about Ironclad and them hiring Mario Carroll from Google, their legal ops lead, and her stepping down from CLOC because she'll be joining Ironclad. And I think like community engagement or officer or something like that. I forgot to look that up. But Ironclad, they earlier this year, back in January, they announced they raised $100 million. And they said like they have ambitions to go public. And I just kind of thought like, oh, are they using some of that money from the war chest to kind of like bolster and build up their team to like take themselves to the next level? So that was kind of interesting, especially, I don't know like what it means for legal ops, that like we see somebody from legal ops join like a legal tech company. We saw that with On It. They had someone from a financial, I think it was New York based, I forget the institution's name. They joined from legal ops and they joined on its legal tech team. So I thought it's kind of interesting how you're seeing it develop, and especially Ironclad, who's been pretty loud about like their ambitions to kind of go further than just being in that legal tech silo. So it's just kind of interesting to see how they're developing, and maybe it means something for legal ops. I'm not really sure.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty interesting too. And, you know, I sort of wonder, she was such a presence for legal ops and for CLOC. I mean, it's very well known, very well spoken, very articulate, just by virtue of her position, had a lot of stature in the industry, if that's the right word. And I wondered too how that's going to shake out now that the next person, I know that there's a new president of CLOC, but be interesting to see if she can be replaced as sort of really the face of legal ops in a lot of ways.
Yeah, one of my reactions was never play poker with Jason Bamick, the CEO of Ironclad, because I just interviewed him like a couple of weeks ago. He was on my podcast it was on up the episode this week or last week, I forget. And how he kept that so close to his vest the whole time we were talking. I don't know, because I would have been dying to tell somebody the news that, you know, we just brought her aboard. I mean, that's just huge news from an industry basis. It's great for Ironclad. It does, you know, it really, it only, I think, underlies the importance of legal ops overall. You know, it may have an effect on CLOC and the organization, but it just emphasizes the importance of that area of the legal field and of the people who work in it.
Yeah, and I'm semi-sniping an article that I think we might write next week here, but you're starting to see that a lot more here, where Victoria mentioned one with On It. You saw the Liberty Mutual team kind of spread out. One went to Deloitte, one went to KP Labs. Even going back a few years, Mike Harmon, who was one of the founders of CLOC, going to Elevate. You're starting to see legal tech. Historically, when they shelled out most likely big bucks to hire somebody who's usually on the sales side, on the marketing side, because that's where their focus was. But they're really looking into operations and, okay, not only how do we establish these relationships because we have people that used to be there, but presumably they can help inform our product as well, tell us what legal ops really needs, because legal ops has been that connection between tech, between GCs in the past. So I think it's smart and something that I wouldn't be surprised to see more of, more people that kind of make their career in legal ops initially go into legal tech and at particularly high positions when they do.
Yeah. It also just underscores something we've talked about multiple times now on this show, which is this how hot the CLM field is right now. And I mean, if you're gonna jump from Google to another job, you're gonna jump into CLM or something like that, because that's, you know, it's a very hot field. There's a lot of money. Ironclad, you know, is a unicorn with its $1 billion valuation, reported valuation. So a lot going on there. Zach, you had started to go. Do you want to?
Yeah, just in speaking of legal technology companies that have gotten a lot of money, there was what was categorized as a merger, but I would categorize it more as an acquisition. Consilio and Xact data this week. Consilio essentially brought Xact on. The company is going to be Consilio moving forward. Xact's former CEO is going to be a VP at Consilio now. When they talked to Legal Tech News, essentially said, yeah, it's tough out there for those middle market e-discovery companies, huh? It's continuing to be an arms race. I think whether it's true or not, who knows, but the perception is out there among some in the e-discovery community that relativity, it can be market share can be taken from them. You've seen a bunch of big dollar deals in recent years to that effect. Disco's gotten a bunch, Reveal with their huge M&A. Consilio has done some in the past, but I think Xact is one of the bigger ones that they've done now, really trying to get into that arms race. So where we've talked about previously, relativity is the 800-pound gorilla and everybody trying to catch up. I think you're slowly starting to see the perception of the market shift a little bit, where maybe it's not one big player, but a few big players that are really snapping up everybody below them. And they're a little bit more on even footing, duking it out among themselves now.
Mm-hmm. I just got a press release today about, I think it was just today from Everlaw. You guys get that about they're having their best year ever or something like that, just having a great year over the last year. And they've got their conference coming up this week. As a matter of fact, this coming week, I think I did a blog post about it, but there's like 3 different legal tech and innovation conferences all coming up in the coming week. None of them using avatars as far as I can tell, but that's their problem, not ours. Niki, do you want to go? What do you got this week?
There was just something that caught my eye on the tail of the is it Chauvin trial and the verdict there, and just the increasing number of videos that are being posted of people of color being overly policed. This Electronic Frontier Foundation article caught my eye that was about AI being used for predictive policing, so that police departments across the country are spending a lot of money on these predictive policing AI technologies that are supposed to help them sort of predict whether someone is about to commit a crime by using arrest records and neighborhood crime records. And EFF's taking the position, as do a lot of other organizations that police the police, for lack of a better word, that it's problematic because of bias. We've talked before about how AI is inherently biased. Oftentimes it's the programming itself and the data that's being used. And in this case, this idea of some crimes being more crime-ridden than others, but then that data has been created by the police over policing those neighborhoods in the first place, because they're neighborhoods where you have people of color. So I just thought it was really interesting to see the EFF's position on that, which I agree with, and the movement to try to remove AI predictive policing analytics as part of that movement to defund the police or rebuild the police from the ground up, because of the idea that policing is really based in initially police departments were created to capture slaves that had escaped into the North or had been released, whatever. I don't even know the proper language, but they were created to capture slaves. And they're racist from their very beginnings. And so this was just another really interesting intersection of legal and tech, but in a different way and in a way that always really captures my attention. And I think it's important to highlight it and also just to track those movements and do what we can to support them as well.
I didn't read the article. Was there a particular study that was it a study that they did, or just kind of a position paper on this or something?
They are, there's different, that's a good question. I believe that it's just, they're just taking this position. They've argued in the past that the technology should be banned, and a group of federal elected officials are raising concerns about the dangers of predictive policing. So it's recently, because of the climate nationally, that's happening in part because of the Black Lives Matter movement and in part because of the verdict in the Chauvin case. It's bringing it back to light. And so they were just sort of releasing the statement to support some of the things that were being done by some legislators, including, and that's also part of that, I think, the Biden administration's movement to try to investigate some police departments as well. So it was just sort of supporting that. And I thought it was interesting and just wanted to bring that up. I
Yeah.
really love the intersection of technology with criminal law in general. And I always go off on this tangent more than the legal tech industry of technology, itself. But I just really think it's an interesting tangent, but I feel like I'm the only one that often brings these things up, but I think they're really interesting and relevant. So
I think it's very interesting. I wonder whether the idea of predictive policing, like the use of any kind of predictive technology in any field, is sort of like toothpaste out of the tube, but the better way to go at it is to somehow address the underlying biases in the technology, rather than expect that police are just going to stop using that technology, because that seems unlikely. I mean, it seems like once they have technology like that, it's going to be harder and harder to get them to not use it, but rather to address the possibility of coming up with predictive technology that is in fact not biased and doesn't have those problems inherent in it. But
the concept is
That's
also offensive,
ahead.
right? It reminds me of the thought police from 1984. There's this slippery slope with these predictive technologies as well that's really just problematic and offensive and dystopian.
Yeah, no question. Steve, were you going to say something on that, or did you?
Oh, yeah, I was just going to follow up on your point, and I was thinking about it. It's if you remove the inherent biases from these kinds of programs, you might be left with a useful tool that could be used by those who are misidentified, who are mischarged criminally, to demonstrate a likelihood of innocence that they couldn't use before, if it's not biased, of course. So who knows where it will lead.
Yeah.
But I guess my question to that then is how? Just because inherently a lot of these technologies that are being used are black boxes. A lot of them are private. You don't necessarily know what's going into the algorithm. And I'm just thinking back to the series that we did about recidivism technologies last year and how they're kind of all over the place. They're not really that well regulated. Some of them are really good, and they're developed by universities who kind of know what they're doing and are particularly looking out for that bias. Others, maybe not so much. So I think it would be obviously good to have unbiased data, but I think it's just as big of a question, how exactly do you regulate that and make sure that it stays unbiased and that you actually know what's going into the algorithm continuously, because I think that's a lot of times easier said than done.
Well, and here's the thing, right? I mean, police have always done this at the end of the day. It's, this idea of like trying to predict where crime is going to be committed. Well, if you have one neighborhood where historically the stats have been very high, of course you're going to put more cops there. That's just how you allocate your resources. And as far as like predicting, like, oh, who's going to commit these crimes? Well, you look at people's rap sheets, like, oh, well, they've done this in the past. They're probably going to do this in the future. So, I mean, at the end of the day, it's like the technology is the technology. But I mean, as long as you're still like reinforcing that kind of, philosophy amongst like police officers as in this is how they do their job. This is how they look for people who may or may not be about to commit crimes and whatnot. Then I mean, it doesn't matter what the technology is going to be. That problem's always going to be there.
Yeah.
All the more reason for us as lawyers and legal community to be all the more vigilant with respect to our constitutional and individual rights in criminal proceedings.
Well, right, and as a former criminal defense attorney, I mean that was my job for the better part of a decade, and the reason that there are more arrests is because there is passive policing where I live. The police don't get involved in your life unless you call them and actively invite them into your life, unless you're committing some sort of major crime and it's on their radar. But that's not what happens in neighborhoods where people of color live. It is active policing and this trying to predict. If they want to know that there are drugs being used, go to any frat house and any campus in this country on any day and you're going to find drugs, but they're not doing that. You know, they're not constantly raiding the frat houses or hanging around outside the frat houses. No, they're not doing this, but they do this in Black neighborhoods and neighborhoods where people of color live. And that's why there's so many more arrests. And people's rap sheets, you know, these kids get arrested when they're 14 for something stupid, like not having a bell on their bike. That's actually something that people get stopped for in Rochester all the time. No one's pulling suburban 5-year-olds over for not having a bell on their bike, but they're pulling young Black boys over. And so then they become part of the justice system at a very young age. And of course, they're going to have more arrests. And I used to see this all the time. You know, these people have rap sheets from a very young age. They weren't doing anything other than walking around as a Black person. And so this predictive policing and using this data, it's flawed at its very, you know, at its essence. And so you can't use this data to predict who's going to commit a crime. And that's why it becomes this stop police. We all think, I want to kill that person, they're a jerk. Just because you thought that doesn't mean you're going to do it. And this sort of is that slippery slope. And so I get a little impassioned about it, as you can tell, but you know, it's because I was in it for a long time. And sometimes you just understand why these people that you represent are just so, they've lost their will to fight, and they're so mad and angry and upset, and there's a reason for it, and it's not fair. And at least these things are being brought to light now, and at least these questions are being asked, but sometimes I think it is too little too late, like you said, Bob.
You know, that's an excellent point, Nikki, because, you know, even with my kids, you know, they got into trouble. All kids get into trouble, right? I mean, that's what you do when you're a teenager. You get into trouble, and, you know, if you're lucky, you don't get caught. I mean, let's face it. Well, you know, a bad man did a couple of things and got caught, right? Nothing serious, but because of who I was, and because my background, and because my access to the justice system, and because I knew how things work, I was able to ensure that they came out of it without a record. But that's because, you know, I'm a white male lawyer. You know, if they had been in a family, if they had been children of color, that they wouldn't have. They would have had the rap sheet that you're talking about. And so all these people, we just sort of, we have this one piece of society that's able to navigate through the legal system and deal with those kinds of things without future repercussions, and this whole other piece of society that can't, and are left with the mess for the rest of their life.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess I think the bigger problem is that policing is broken, and I think that's kind of what your point is, Nikki. We need to really address. That's what really needs to be addressed. I mean, the one thing we have seen over and over again over the last year is just how badly broken how we police, how our country polices is and if you put flawed technology in the hands of a broken system, then you're really going to have trouble. I mean, part of the problem, part of the question about this technology is, how is it used? How is it deployed? If it's used, if it's just being used to kind of allocate resources in some general way, well, maybe that's okay. If it's being used to more specifically target groups or individuals or people based on the color of their skin or where they live, that's much more concerning.
Bob, when you talked about like the ways that you could use technology and like law enforcement actually be useful and not actually create more disparities, that reminded me of, I think in San Francisco, the DA there, he introduced like this tech program that would like black out mentions of like people's names, you know, things that would kind of define their like race, ethnicity, I think even gender and sexuality, and just like the what was it, the lawyers, the assistant DAs would first see the report and things would be blocked out, so they couldn't figure out like what race or ethnicity someone was, and they would make their decision like, okay, this is maybe the charges that we should bring. And then they would see a later version, they would see with everything there. And if they made changes based on, oh no, I think we should actually up the charges, they would have to write like, why did you make that decision after you saw like their name and where they were and everything like that. So there are ways, and I've heard like people also use that type of like blacking out system for resumes. So like if someone has like a name that maybe seems a little too ethnic, and they might say, oh, I don't know, there'll be a fit here. You know, there are some ways that I think like it kind of can like take out maybe some biases when like you in using technology. So there are ways, so it's not like we have to be completely like old school and just say, oh, tech is bad, we can never use it. But there's some ways that you can use it to kind of like make people a little bit less, maybe take the bias out, or maybe make people look at things a little bit differently.
All right, well, since we just heard from Niki about somebody else's story, I think Steve was going to talk about Niki's story.
Yes.
Well, I think it was your story, but you mentioned me.
Well, as I've told Bob before, I don't have an original thought in my head, so I only get by plugging in on other people's story. No, so
Not
I
true.
I was interested in looking back at the Monroe County Bar Association and the Avatar Conference, and what I was particularly interested in, that was as Niki knows, and so well,
In our starring role in that.
in our starring role. But the conference was a solo and small firm annual meeting, and so I was curious about that because whenever you start talking about an Avatar conference, even in the legal tech world, people are kind of like, I don't know, that sounds kind of nerdy, and we all joke about it. I mean, you guys kid Niki and I, like, that is crazy too. Avatar people, what are they, and so I was really interested in what did the Monroe County solo and small firm lawyers think of this. So I talked to Kevin Ryan, who's the executive director, and somewhat to my surprise, he said they loved it. They loved it. They thought it was great. In fact, it was almost life-changing or career-changing to some of them. And he went on to tell me that these were not the most, many of these people were not the most computer literate lawyers. And this is in Rochester, New York, for everybody's background. And some of the lawyers he least expected to like this liked it the most. I mean, it was really quite eye-opening. And I said, well, was there grumbling ahead of time? And he said, no, not really. And there wasn't any complaining afterwards. It was all kind of complimentary, and people just thought it was a great way to have a conference. And so it struck me that maybe the conference industry has been a little bit too hesitant to adopt this kind of approach for conferences, for fear that it just looked too strange. Very few problems in downloading the software, which also sort of surprised me because the first time I did it, it took a couple of clicks. And so, I asked him, I said, well, what do you think if we come out of the pandemic and we start having live conferences, what do you think about this? And he and I both sort of concluded that this is not, the avatars don't work for hybrid conferences. I mean, it just doesn't you're either all avatars or you're none of you are, and it doesn't fit. But for a lot of conferences, particularly as Kevin identified, state bar associations, for example, who have members spread out through a large state. I mean, Kentucky's not the largest state, but it's a long state, and people are pretty spread out. And it could be a good way for diverse geographical people to come together and have a good time. I mean, I love both those conferences, that the EDRM one and the Monroe County Bar one. It just was so much more natural. And so I hope as we go forward, Niki and I both hope that everybody will vote for avatars.
And thanks so much for writing about that and the Bar Association doing that. I really appreciated your doing that and taking an interest in it and reaching out to Kevin too. So thank you. Oh,
well, you're welcome. I was glad you were gracious enough to let me plug in on behind your story. I just, I think it's got a place. And, in the future, whenever somebody says, I don't think that's viable for us, I'm going to say, well, look, if the Monroe County Bar Association, a bunch of solo and small firm lawyers can do it and like it, we can all do it. And I don't mean that is insulting to the Monroe County Bar Association at all.
No, I think that's really interesting. I like the Avatar conferences. I've enjoyed them, but I've always thought it's going to be a hurdle to get, just sort of regular non-techie lawyers to engage in these kinds of conferences. So, and I think probably Niki would even tell you that leading up to the Monroe event, she was kind of wondering how it was going to play out and what would happen. So it's great to hear that it
Yeah.
went well and that people engaged with it and liked it. Hopefully we don't have to be spending too much more time talking about virtual conferences, though. I'm looking forward to the face-to-face ones going forward. I know we're all talking about hybrid conferences, but I took Joe's tip and booked my cheap hotel room in Vegas already, like $30 a night or something.
It's unreal. It's unreal how cheap it is right now.
I need to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I did the upgrade and it was still like only 35 or something like that. It's nuts.
Yeah.
And in all fairness, regarding our event, I think that there were some lawyers that probably did not sign up for the conference that otherwise would have attended because of the avatars. But there were also some lawyers there that were not the most tech savvy. That kind of surprised me that they were there. That once they committed to it and dove in, they enjoyed it. But I definitely think that it did affect attendance numbers a bit, and so the people that just weren't willing to give it a try just didn't give it a try. So
Yeah,
in all fairness, there's both sides of that.
Kevin and I talked about that a little bit, and he like you, Niki, it's hard to know why people didn't attend. I mean, it's, Kevin sort of said, it's been a hard year for solo and small firm lawyers, which is true. And, whether that contributed to, lower attendance, who knows? But yeah, I mean, obviously some people may have turned their nose up at it. It would be interesting to see if they had the opportunity to do it again next year, which will probably be live next year, but whether more people will come in because people say, well, this is really a lot of fun.
Victor, you've got a story this week. You want to talk about that?
Oh yeah, I didn't make the email before the show, so I wasn't sure if I was gonna get a chance to talk about it or not.
You got it on the spreadsheet, which is where it's supposed to go. You get points, man.
So just this week out of Europe, probably not the biggest news to come out of Europe this week, but for soccer fans, they know what I'm talking about. But there's a New York Times article that talked about how the EU is proposing very strict regulations concerning ethical use of AI. I thought that was very interesting, just with the way that they were going about it. One thing that they've been pretty like talking about, like just like how facial recognition should be deployed. Wanting to make sure that the having human oversight, wanting to make sure that the data can be vetted. For deep fakes, they want to have something, have some kind of indication to put under that it's that it was manipulated or it was altered somehow. So it just kind of struck me as sort of like the EU is kind of has been on the vanguard of sort of like protecting consumers, protecting people from making sure that tech doesn't overreach and making sure people are protected from that. And this with GDPR, and this is just another example of that. Just shows that they're really kind of on the cutting edge as far as like protecting individuals, making sure that tech is deployed ethically. I mean, obviously, devil's in the details with these kind of things, but I just thought it was very interesting with just how they're going about it.
Victor, how are they going about it? And how would they regulate AI?
Just like they set strict regulations as far as like making sure that like facial recognition software was the algorithms for like vetting the algorithms for facial recognition software, having human oversight of various AI, various programs and whatnot, making sure that the data is vetted properly. For, like I said, for the deep fakes, they want to make sure they have something on there to make sure that it says that it was manipulated or was changed somehow. And I think the penalty is that it's they're like commercial penalties, and they're like some other ways that they're going to regulate it. So I mean, it just kind of shows that this is where they're thinking, that this is where their minds are with regards to that stuff.
Yeah, you kind of said it though. At least for me, the devil is kind of in the details a little bit, particularly when I'm thinking about something like GDPR. We've had a couple of very high profile fines, but I think if you talk to some privacy lawyers over there, they'll say, we thought they'd be a little bit more heavy-handed in actually enforcing this stuff than they've actually been. So I'm curious with something like this, particularly with AI, which is a relatively cutting edge technology like facial recognition. I'm curious ambiguous as to how much enforcement they will actually be doing. I definitely think it's a step in the right direction, and I definitely think it's a good thing to implement, but we'll see how it's actually carried out. And don't mind me if I'm a little bit skeptical on how they'll be doing it.
Sure, and I think these are proposed rules, so I don't even know I don't know what the process is as far as like adopting things over there. This is where probably having Caroline would probably be helpful as far as explaining how the EU works. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't know what the procedure is as far as like modifying the rules go. I'm sure some companies will have some opinions about this. I think there's the one in the panel. I think they could be fined up to like 6% of their global sales, which is that could be a lot for some companies. It might not be too much for others. So yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see where they are going forward. And I mean, it'll be interesting to see if this spurs anything in the United States, to see if if we follow them like we did with GDPR.
I think one other possible, I don't know, this isn't a direct implication for legal tech, but I forget whether we've talked about this issue before, but I know, I'm sure some of us have written about it. I know I've written about it, this question of the extent to which legal tech companies should be expected to be somewhat transparent about their own, AI algorithms that they're using in their products. And some of that comes out of the research into differences among legal research algorithms and how they produce different results based on their algorithms. The bottom line being that algorithms are not perfect. They're imperfect. They're written by humans, and they have sort of inherent biases, not the kind of biases we were talking about before with regard to racial profiling or that sort of thing, but they even if they just have biases in terms of how they influence the results of a search, that's something that consumers of those products should have some ability to know. And I know some of the legal research companies have taken sort of small steps towards providing some transparency around their algorithms. Fastcase has a little place you can go and kind of see how their algorithm is being weighted, and you can adjust. There's like little sliders where you can adjust the weighting of their algorithm to produce different search results. So it's not quite regulation of AI, but I think going forward, even if not regulation around AI, I think we should expect to see companies become more transparent around their AI. And I think that's something we're going to eventually expect as a right.
It's interesting, the Supreme Court decision yesterday, sort of with respect to all of this, and they came out with an opinion which basically denied the ability of the Federal Trade Commission to recover monies for consumers for deceptive practices, which, you might say, so what? But the so what is, so somebody, sells some of your your private information and you're identified. Well, oh, that's really bad, but what can you do about it, right? You're going to go hire a lawyer. You're going to sue the company. That's going to cost you more than it'll ever be worth. What are you're going to file a class action? Who wants to do that? Not too many. And so the FTC was kind of stepping into that breach and trying to collect money and police deceptive practices, particularly in the technology arena. And now they've had a pretty significant tool removed from them. So I thought it could end up being a pretty important opinion, and could let a lot of technology companies get away with more than they have in the past.
Mm-hmm. All right, did I miss anybody? I didn't miss anybody, right? Anybody have any rants or raves? Anything they want to rant about this week?
Yes. We broke a snow record 2 days ago in Rochester, a snow record. It was upsetting, and I'm still pissed about it. There's still like this much, a little teeny weeny pile of snow on our patio table, and it won't go away. It's like taunting me from the kitchen window whenever I do dishes. So that's what I want to rant about. Breaking a snow record in mid-April, almost late April. So definitely not legal tech related.
Yeah, you choose to live in Rochester, New York. You bring this stuff on yourself. I ask myself all the time, what am I doing in the Northeast when there's warm places all over this country I could be?
Oh, being in Minnesota, I definitely feel that one. We were actually chatting a little bit before we came on. I was in Green Bay for a period of 6 months, and I will always remember I was working at the NBC station there. On April 20th, we had a foot-long snowstorm, or foot-tall snowstorm. And because I was the intern, they wanted me to come in for school closings. So I never did the early morning shift. I was there at 3 a.m. It was me and the morning show producer. And when I got in, the morning show producer was blasting Grateful Dead and in a very happy mood. And I was very confused until realizing that it was 420. So sometimes April snowstorms happen, and sometimes they can be fun coincidences that you look back on and realize how naive you were.
All right. Any other rants, raves, comments, thoughts? Brilliant
Well,
insights.
I'm glad the European Super League failed. I was very upset about that. Not because I thought it was undemocratic or I thought it was, a destruction of the merit-based system or whatnot. It's just because I didn't want to see my team get their butts kicked every year by Real Madrid and Barcelona. So I'm very happy about that.
All right. We may have to pick that up again when Caroline's back next week, because I think she had some opinions about that as well. All right. Well, I think that does it. Joe's got to go. Joe's got a lot of celebrating to do. It's his birthday.
Ew.
Go have a good
I
day.
do. We're getting a group of all the vaccinated people in my world are all getting together. So yeah, it's going to be like the first time we can do that.
Showing scabs or something, or
yeah. Well, I mean, we've got our little New York passports and everything, and yeah, so we're going to a place, and they've got a room for us because we're all in.
Awesome. That sounds like fun.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks to everybody, and we'll be back again next week talking about legal tech and
Bye,
innovation. Everybody have a good week.
Have a good
Go on.
weekend.